Okay, I'm Karen Rann and I'm a visual artist based in the northeast of England. My practice has been, up until recently, always in response to place, quite often artist residencies, going to somewhere, finding about the history, the geology, geography, talking to people, maybe involving people, and creating artwork that responds to that, perhaps using materials from that landscape, sort of found or recycled, and often then drawing lines in the landscape, a little bit like taking lines for a walk. And then, so one time I was doing a residency with the National Trust for Scotland on Arran, and found myself standing on the flanks of Goat Fell with a historical map in one hand with the pictorially drawn mountains, contour map in the other, with no idea how we'd got from one to the other. And there's no book on it. So the last 10, 11 years of my life, I've been following a line, chasing a line onto maps. The early stages of looking into contour lines were mostly in Scotland, but then I realised an important part of the story was what the Ordnance Survey had been doing, and particularly what they had been doing in Ireland. I was lucky enough to get funding for a PhD at Queen's in Belfast in their geography department, and then realised that the first contouring experiments were here, not just in Donegal, not just on the Inishowen Peninsula, but here in the parish of Desatagny. So 2021, I came to do some field research, got chatting to the staff at ArtLink, and I'm so delighted to be able to show some of the results, the visual results of the PhD here, where it all began. So the exhibition you see here is called Drawing with Altitude. It's actually called Drawing with Altitude 2 because I was here in 2023 briefly doing walks and talks and workshops with children around the fact that in the parish of Desatagny is this, to me, very important hill called Mullagharry, which is the only place we have evidence of the hill sketches trialling contouring for the Ordnance Survey for the very first time in 1839. So a lot of the material in the exhibition relates to what the people who did the contouring were hill sketchers, and they were already using descriptive horizontal lines to draw hills before they began the contouring with theodolite and spirit level. So on the drafting desk here, I've got a hill drawing that I am compiling from some of the material you can see behind me, which includes hill sketches onto the base map, just as the hill sketchers would have done. I'm trying to follow their methods, and from their hill sketches, they compiled indoor drawings, and then what you have here on the desk is a compilation from those indoor drawings. So you're beginning to see the hill from every angle as the hill sketcher would have moved around it. It's fiercely difficult. The hill sketchers would have had 2 years training before they were employed. I haven't had that. But I love trying, and I love any opportunity to be out walking and looking. And then it's great to be able to have everything out on show here. It's been really interesting for me to think about how to improve my own skills. I haven't had a go at contouring. I don't own a theodolite. But in the corner is the manuscript lines of the hill sketches doing the contouring, and from those I have made a three-dimensional model of the hill as the contourers drew it in 1839, and alongside that a similar model but using modern contours. So you can see the similarities. They've got the overall shape of the hill bang on, I'd say, but also the differences in the type of line they used and where they generalized the shape of the hill. Then moving on from that, right tucked in the corner, I have 3 drawings of Ireland, which were done after the PhD. I wanted to do them because for young people now, they don't often look at paper maps, if at all. A map is something on a sat-nav or on a phone. And I wanted to show kind of the importance of what contour lines could do. So the left-hand one shows Ireland, but as though the sea around it has dropped by 25 meters. So it's a little bit fatter, a little bit bigger than what you would normally see of Ireland. Then the middle one, instead of lowering the sea, you have to imagine that mean sea level has been raised 200 meters. And so what you have is a kind of archipelago of islands of the higher land around Ireland. It's scattered with the land around the Midlands in the middle, very sparsely populated with tiniest islands. And then the one on the right shows Ireland at around 400, 450 meters. I haven't done this scientifically. This is me looking at maps and drawing from what I see. But it gives a rough idea of what contour lines then show, because just using the one line at around 400 meters, the scattering of islands becomes very, very disparate. And it's wonderful watching the penny drop with children as, right, sea level rise, this is what could happen. And this is what contour lines show us on a map. So it's a really good starter to draw them into other areas of the exhibition. So in the space also there are 2 demonstrations of how to contour a stone that looks like a hill, which seems like a very odd thing to do. But in 1839, it was really important to demonstrate to anybody what a contour line is, because this was a new idea. And if they wanted people to be able to draw them onto maps, they had to understand what they were. So a bit like the sea level analogy from the 3A3 drawings, in the first one, the 1839 one, I followed the instructions from a treatise how they did this demonstration. So they found a stone that looked somewhat like a hill and put it in a container, bedded in clay to hold it in place. The container had to have a spigot so that you would be able to drain it, but then you filled it with diluted Indian ink. They didn't say how much to dilute by. And then once there's just the tip of the stone showing, as if the stone had been flooded, then opening the spigot, the level would be allowed to drop a certain interval and closed again, so that the surface tension might leave a mark around the stone. Doesn't always work. And then more is drawn off, and so on, until you should end up with a stone with a series of layered lines. But I think the reason they wanted to do it as a demonstration was to show people in the classroom these, almost like the lines of sea wrack that are left as the tide goes out on a beach. You know, to really demonstrate that what these lines are and how you might see them in nature. I've used blue ink because I like that analogy with the sea. They don't say. I think Indian ink was a brown or a black. Anyway, How successful that was in the classrooms, I don't really know, but I do know that 2 years later, another treatise writer was giving a version of that experiment, which is much more successful, which is to have a clear glass container on a turntable with a gauge, and you get your stone that looks like a hill, put it in the container, and fill with water to the first level of the gauge, and then draw around the stone, and then a little bit more water in and draw around again. And the lines then are much more successful, but also more diagrammatic, which I think is the direction of travel anyway, in that it fitted with ideas about gathering statistics and just other elements of abstraction and data collection that were around in from the 1830s through to the end of that century. So in amongst those experiments or demonstrations, I have a bench full of models of hills of the style that would have been used in classrooms to teach drawing to both hill sketchers and to military cadets, because drawing was an essential skill. Before photography, it was, how else were you going to describe to your commanding officer a land if you couldn't draw it? And if you were mapping, it was essential to be able to draw top down. So they started from 1790s through to 1802, 3. They suggested drawing from stones that looked like hills. Then they started making plaster casts that they could slot together, so you have rivers running in between, drawing those. The master draftsman who was teaching most of the hill sketchers and some of the cadets, Robert Dawson, was teaching two styles as well. Vertical lines descriptive of the hill that looked like how rain might fall down its sides, and also the horizontal style, which looks like rings around the hills and was sometimes described as horizontal hills. And by 1820, this was the only method that the hill sketchers used, was these descriptive contour-like lines. And in fact, Robert Dawson's son, when he became head of the hill department in Ireland, said something about the hill sketchers all being out drawing contours. But he meant these lines, but this is before we have a fixed description of what a contour line is. But they saw their drawing style as contouring. While I was doing the PhD during the lockdowns, I sent to some artist friends of mine some of the model hills that I've been creating in plaster, with directions for the different styles of drawing that was taught 200 years ago. So these vertical descriptive lines for a hill and also the horizontal, and asked them to be my cadets and to trial those drawing methods. So above the bench you can see examples of the where this exercise took them, and I'm really pleased to be able to show those alongside the other materials here. On the one hand, having the exhibition here places material around these first contours where they were drawn, but in order to mark the larger elements, such as the Ordnance Survey beginning 200 years ago, we thought it'd be really, really good to have a symposium at the end of the exhibition and to bring in all kinds of people with disparate knowledge of the Ordnance Survey, of the baseline, the other side of Lough Foyle. So again, really in the vicinity, some of the older maps of Ireland that was so important. So alongside myself, we had John McCarran talking about these older maps and putting those in the context of how we learn of a place, how the history is conveyed through those old maps. And Professor Keith Lilly talking about this bicentenary of the Ordnance Survey, but also about the Lough baseline. Really interesting questions from the audience, and then a panel of, again, mostly people from this area with a really deep-rooted knowledge of place and place names. So it was this wonderful sharing of experiences. And then also alongside that, 2 guided walks. So the first walk was with John Hegarty and Vary Sutherland. That was around Hill Dunree, but with the fantastic views across the parish of Desertegny, with incredible stories captured by Vary in an equivalent of an Ordnance Survey name book, which everybody contributed to. And John, his wealth of knowledge and incredible stories, interlinking place with place and layer of history with layer. And the second walk with myself and Sharon Porter, where we were able to take people to the top of Mullagharry, this hill that was, for me, the centre of my PhD, the focus of the PhD, and where contouring for the Ordnance Survey began. One of the reasons for having the exhibition this year is that 2024 marks the bicentenary of the Ordnance Survey in Ireland. That was the year that they began, which maybe isn't a cause for celebration, but is interesting, I think, because there were so many remarkable innovations that came out of Ireland and travelled around the world. Not just contouring, but the use of limelight on Slieve Snacht. That's the anniversary of that is next year. Malin Head as the top of Ireland as always being sheet number 1. And so the whole idea of sheet numbering consecutively hadn't happened in England, happened in Ireland. Contouring began in Ireland, working on the 6-inch scale, travelled around the world, began in Ireland. And yes, there were a lot of English people here overseeing that, but employment for a lot of Irish people, Irish artists coming in, hill sketching, and then taking their skills into Europe, back down to London. So it's contested, but I can see that there's a lot of things to feel good about, that these things happened here. And it's good to mark that and acknowledge that, and particularly here, that it happened so close to where ArtLink is. Not long after we'd opened the exhibition, I was sitting at the drafting table, working away, and this gentleman came in and said, "Oh, you're still working?" And I said, "Yes, I will be adding to the back wall." "Oh, so the exhibition isn't finished?" And I said, "No. And he followed up with, "Well, when will it be finished?" And I thought, well, is he thinking I should come back when it's done? So I had to say to him, it's never finished, it's a process. And that's the joy of this kind of work. And even though it's coming down imminently and all the work's going to be put away, I would love to be back next year to climb Slieve Snacht again and maybe do something to mark the bicentenary of Limelight. So I'll be back.